All right, if you got a Bible this morning, go ahead and grab it, and we're going to be in the Gospel of Mark chapter 4. Mark chapter 4. We begin with a quote by Russ Ramsey in one of my favorite books ever written. He wrote this book on finding faith in Christ through the eyes of art. And he wrote about different famous works of art and different artists, and it's a fascinating read, especially if you're into that type of literature. And in that book, he made this declaration, which we all know to be true, particularly in our very visually driven age, but we need to be reminded of. He says, a story is a Trojan horse for truth. It can sneak truth past the gates of our defenses and prepare our hearts to hear things we might have resisted if they had come as mere declaration. So he's obviously drawing on the analogy, the ancient analogy from Homer of the Trojan horse snuck into the streets of the impregnable city of Troy. And he's saying that's what story does. That when we tell story, and Jesus, the most famous storyteller ever, the gospel accounts are full of him telling his stories and also full of historical stories of what he did. And what this does is it introduces us to the person and character of Christ. This is why oftentimes if you have a new convert, somebody who's exploring the Christian faith, we don't send them to Romans, which is great. We don't send them to Philippians or Colossians, we send them to John. Because we encounter truth most readily through narrative and through storytelling. So what we're doing is we're spending this summer 8 weeks together, starting last week, walking through stories, and they are the stories of the miracles of Jesus. And some scholars have said these have to be legendary. There's no way that this actually happened. There's no way we can actually espouse and ascribe to the reality of miracles. And yet other leading historians and scholars, one I read this week, one of the most leading historians in New York City said, non-Christian as she is, said, I have to believe that these stories were written down not as legend, but as factual because of the very nature of the literature. It's become very common in our day to read books. You go to Barnes & Noble, you can pick up any types of books on fantasy literature. Obviously, Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia made that very popular in the 20th century. But it was not common in the first century to write fiction in a very realistic or fantastical type of way. As a matter of fact, fiction was not even that prominent, but if it was going to be written, it was going to be written in a very vague, kind of surfacey way, like what you see in the Aeneid and the Iliad from Homer. It was going to be pointing to different concepts, but it wasn't going to share details. What's very interesting is you study the miracles of Jesus, in particular where we are in Mark chapter 4 this morning, almost all notable, conservative, even non-Christian historians would admit that this was not written as fiction. That's not how they wrote fiction in the first century. They did not include this plethora of details within the story that we see here. And so we must take it as historical fact, or at least to have been written as such. So we hear this, and we begin to see this morning, I think, a few truths that are going to really hopefully impact and comfort and shape our thinking and our lives. So let's just read this. Kat already read it for us, but let's just read and kind of make note as we go through, and then we're going to see three realities I think we need to hear this morning. Verse number 35. On that day, it says, and I mentioned this last week, Mark writes in a very rapid fire style and fashion in his writing. He's not as wordy or robust in his language as Luke. He writes very quickly. It's the shortest of the four Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, what are called the Synoptic Gospels, all record this story as historically factual, but Mark is the first to write it down, probably through the testimony of Peter. That was his mentor. And he says on that day, and what had happened is you can go back in the text and study it for yourself, but Jesus on this day has been teaching parables, and the crowds are so numerous on the side of the Sea of Galilee that he climbs into a boat. And he's sitting just offshore in this fishing boat, and he's teaching hundreds or thousands of people. Now, I don't know what your thought, your perspective is of Israel and the Sea of Galilee. If you've been a Christian, you've read the Bible, you probably have this picture in mind of kind of a windswept desert very arid area, but that is not the Sea of Galilee. I was shocked a couple of years ago when I went to Israel, and we made our way north of Tel Aviv and into Galilee, and it is beautiful. It is green and it is lush, and the Sea of Galilee, I've got a picture here for you guys, but you can look it up for yourself. This is the Sea of Galilee. It's not what people think of. You have the hills of Galilee on one side, and behind them, the Mediterranean. And then you have the Golan Heights on the other side, and reaching up to the top of the Golan Heights, some 9,300 feet, is Mount Hermon, which we read about in the Psalms. It is covered almost year-round in snow, like the snow of Moses' beard, it says in the Psalms. And you can see it's incredibly picturesque, incredibly beautiful, but the Sea of Galilee itself sits 700 feet below sea level. So there's almost a 10,000-foot difference between Mount Hermon to the northeast and the Sea of Galilee, and there's hills surrounding. We actually went up on a Sunday morning onto Mount Arbel, at the highest mount on the hillside of Galilee, and could look down and see all the places where Jesus had performed his miracles. But because of the topography of this area, the winds sweep down off the Golan Heights, and in a matter of mere moments, the Sea of Galilee can be thrown from quiet and beauty, tranquility, like we see in this photograph, to absolute chaos. 12 to 15 foot waves descending up on this 140-foot deep sea. And that's what we find here in the story. It still happens to this day. You can look up videos on YouTube for yourself of the storms that descend with rapid nature and ferocity upon the sea. And so Jesus is on that day, he's preaching in a boat on the Sea of Galilee. That's the picture that we have in mind. It is peaceful, it is calm, it is sunny, it is still, and he's speaking to, obviously it cannot be windy, it cannot be a lot of waves because the people have to hear him. And so he's speaking as amplified as he can in an acoustic voice to the people. And evening had come, and he told his disciples, let's cross over to the other side of the sea, probably back toward Capernaum. So they would be on the eastern side of the sea, moving west toward Capernaum, as we saw last week. And here's some of the details. So they left the crowd, they took him along, since he was in the boat. The actual Greek says, in the boat that he already was in, a detail that's not lost in the story. And other boats were with him, and a lot of these are just unnecessary details that point to the legitimacy of the story. A great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking not against the boat, but over the boat, so the boat was already being swamped. And he was in the stern. For us land lovers, that's the back of the boat, sleeping on the cushion. That would have been very common in that day to have some type of cushion in the back of the boat. So he has fallen asleep. He's obviously exhausted. He's still sleeping in the midst of this terrible tempest. And what would be akin to a hurricane upon the Sea of Galilee. And they woke him up, and they said to him, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to die?" So here's the story. Here's the picture. You got 12 guys in a boat. Most of them have grown up on the ocean. We got a few, boaters in here, sea captains, whatever. And they're much more, I would think, much more calm, less anxiety when they're on the ocean. Just like we have a couple pilots here in our church. And they're much more calm, I would guess, I hope, when they take off than I am. When I'm on the sea or when I'm up in the air. I have to entrust myself to this vessel and to those who are guiding it. And so these men are here in the boat, and such a chaotic tempest arises that the waves are overwhelming the boat, and the boat is beginning to take on water, and the boat is going to sink. It is fierce, and it is frightening. And so they convene together, they huddle up, and they have a committee meeting. And one of them is appointed, maybe two. And so they kind of tiptoe their way back to Jesus in the boat, and they kind of shake his shoulder. Hey, Rabbi, can you wake up for a second? Some of those other guys up there, they're scared. Not me, I'm good, but some of them, they're scared. And just if you want to, if you have the time, maybe do something about this. We're taking us back to shore. That whole walking on water thing would be cool right now. I don't know, can you do something? That's not how the story goes. That's not how Mark portrays it for us. That's not how Luke or Matthew portray it for us. They're frightened. The boat is taking on water. They are about to drown. and be sent to the depths of the Sea of Galilee. They're caught in a storm, helpless in a storm. Destruction is imminent. And they run to Jesus and they scream, what? You don't care about us. Like, look around us. Look at what is happening in my life. Look how destructive this is. Don't you care that I am about to die? Or in other words, you don't care that I am about to die. You should care. This kind of brings us to our first reality this morning as we walk through this text. And that first reality, and I'll explain it, unpack it for us. We need to be reminded of it, is that Jesus Christ legitimately cares. I mean, now my children will accuse me of being uncaring or unloving because I'll do things for my children that are best for them, but that their little minds convince them is worse. And we do the same thing. Things that are beyond our comprehension, things that we do not understand. It's already attested to this morning before we sang Creator. Like, almost everybody in this church is carrying something. You're going through something. If you're not going through something, good luck. It's coming, right? It's just going to happen at some point in time. I remember, obviously I remember, it was a couple weeks ago, we went on this cruise out of Port Canaveral, and we're on the Carnival Vista. It's the biggest carnival boat we had ever been on. And at the very top of it, they have this little contraption. It's like a bicycle that you sit in, you get strapped into, and then you pedal out 11 floors above the Caribbean. And you literally are hanging over the side of the boat, and my little girl and my oldest son, they want to go with me, and they want to race around the boat, and I'm not going to lie. I used to have a fear of heights. It's gotten a little bit better over time, but as I strap into that contraption, and you start pedaling out, all you can see is the Caribbean in front of you, and it's a big sea. A couple of times on the boat, I'm sitting there with my wife, Danielle, and we're talking, and I'm like, man, it's just so much bigger than you realize. And she's like, that's good. Good for you for realizing that. But I'm like, it's just huge out here. Like, the Gulf is just huge. The Gulf of whatever it is called these days. But it's just huge, right? I mean, it's just a massive. And then at night, we go down into the boat, and we're going to sleep, and you'll kind of feel the movement. Everybody else is asleep, and you feel the movement. And my mind, this is what my mind does, is it goes, what if we capsized? Like, what if we tipped over? I mean, this is huge. Like, I cannot imagine how much this boat's under the water, but a lot of it is outside of the water. How does this work? And it's frightening to think about. They're here on the Sea of Galilee, and they're frightened, they're overwhelmed, they're in despair, they're hopeless because they're hopeless. They've been led into the storm. This can't be missed. They've been led into the storm by a caring sovereign God to remind them of their helplessness, so they will cast their dependency back on the only one who can save. You can't miss that. I read this week about the top fears in America. I mean, it used to be like fear of public speaking and fear of death. People made the joke, people are more afraid of public speaking than of death. But as of this year, coming in this year, you can probably guess the leading fear in America, number one, was government corruption. So everybody's afraid of. On either side, I think. Unless you're burying your head in the sand. It's like government corruption, government overreach. And I think number three on the list was that my family member someone in my family, someone that I love dearly, would become gravely ill. Which means that at the forefront of the mind of Americans, we are more practically fearful of what could go wrong in our government and in our nation than we are of family members close to us growing ill. Fears abound, they're everywhere. Anxiety is at an all-time high. And this text reminds us again that in the midst of the storm, whatever it is, all the chaos that's swirling around you, bad health, family issues, financial crisis, whatever it is, that Jesus cares. We want to throw up our hands at times and go, hey, you don't. Where are you? You don't care. Like, I actually hear this from people all the time. When something happens, I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got here. I don't know what is happening. How could this happen to me? How could you allow or cause this to happen to me? You don't care. That's the mentality of the disciples. And Jesus rises up and he shows right away that he legitimately cares, just not primarily or chiefly about the things that we primarily or chiefly care about. He cares about that part of us that will never die, chiefly. But he cares about the day-to-day. It's obvious from the facts of the story, from the details here of the story. Jesus legitimately cares. A second thing that we see here is not only does he legitimately care, but Jesus miraculously calms. Because that's good news for us. I talk about this often, but he'd be kind of a pathetic God if he just cared and he couldn't calm. Or if he could calm, but he didn't care to. But you meld these together, this idea of mercy and might. And that's what we see here with Jesus on the Sea of Galilee. They scream out to him, "Teacher, Rabbi, don't you care that we're going to die?" Verse number 39, he got up and he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Sit still, sit down, shut up, be quiet." Once again, you can almost imagine this in the Sea of Galilee. This tempest, waves so high, you cannot see the shoreline. The sky is so dark, thunder roaring, lightning flashing, and he steps up into the boats and he looks out upon nature and he says, "Stop." There's a mega storm, it says here in the text. That's literally the Greek rendering. And it goes from mega storm to mega calm, the sea of glass. Now, it's easy to get caught up in the story here, to read the story and to hear what it's saying here about Jesus calming the storm miraculously on the sea. But this would have meant something to the disciples, something more than we just realized by reading the text. This would have meant something to the first century, second century readers in Judaism. If you got your Bibles with you this morning or your phone or tablet or whatever it is, you can hold your finger there in Mark chapter 4, but I want to go back to Job 38. So it's the center of your Bible. We're going to turn back to the left, Job 38. You don't have to turn there. You can just take my word for it. It's always a dangerous thing. But anyway, we're going to read this together just a little bit, just one passage. So the book of Job, we spent some time in this not long ago, the book of Job, when we talked about meltdown and crisis in life. And Job is basically this remarkable test of faith and perseverance as God preserves his man Job through the midst of everything that life and Satan could throw at him. And in the very end, Job kind of has some questions for God, as we saw a few months ago. And he has some indictments in his questioning of God. Where are you? You don't really care. You didn't protect me. You weren't with me. You're not very much of a loving, good father as I thought you were. And then God responds. God speaks. And it's quite interesting how he speaks. It's not a gentle, still, small voice, but it is out of a tornado, out of the whirlwind. And we're just going to read one little section of what he says here. Job, keep in mind, Job was the first book of the Bible ever written chronologically. So this book is written probably 4,500 years ago. And it says this. Verse number 8, Job 38. Who enclosed the sea behind doors when it burst from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and total darkness its blanket, and I determined its boundaries and put its bars and doors in place, when I declared to the sea, you may come this far, but no further, you proud waters, stop here. So right from the very beginning, the early ripplings of Judaism, the idea that only God himself, only Elohim, Jehovah, he alone can chart the seas. He alone sets their boundaries. You flip forward, and I'm just going to share a couple of these with you. Psalm 107, all right? Look at Psalm 107, because these are the text, the passages that would be flittering through the disciples' minds, through the first century readers' minds. Psalm 107, verse 23. That's what the psalmist writes. Others went to sea in ships, conducting trade on the vast water. They saw Yahweh's works, his wondrous works in the deep. He spoke and raised the stormy wind that stirred up the waves of the sea. Rising up to the sky, sinking down to the depths, their courage melting away in anguish. They reeled and staggered like a drunkard, and all their skill was useless. Then they cried out to Yahweh in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. He stilled the storm to a whisper, and the waves of the sea were hushed. They rejoiced when the waves grew quiet. Then he guided them to the harbor they longed for. Flip back, Psalm 89, that's the last one. And there are so many others, countless others, talk about God rebuking the storms or God stilling the sea. But Psalm 89, here's one more passage for our consideration that would have played out in the minds of the readers in the first century. Psalm 89, verse 8 and 9. Yahweh, Elohim of armies, who is strong like you, Yahweh? Your faithfulness surrounds you. You rule the raging sea. When its waves surge, you still them. Now, this moved forward into history, this idea that only God himself can calm the water, so much so that when an emperor would rise up, when a dictator would emerge, oftentimes they would try to show that they were divine by how they could conquer or still or punish the waters. We see this in Xerxes in the 5th century, when he leads his campaign of 1 million soldiers, according to historians, according to Herodotus, upon the Greeks. And they make their way to the shoreline, but before they get to the shoreline, a great storm emerges, and Xerxes is so upset because he is a god among men that history records for us that he actually spanked the waters. But they did not steal for him. They rose up in rebellion against him. They rose up as a testament, the storm did, that you are not God. You're not divine. You move forward in the history to Caligula, one of the worst Roman emperors, according to most historians. And he said that he was a god among men, and his proof that he was a god among men is that he could calm the waters of the Mediterranean, of the Aegean, of the Black Sea. And they brought him out, and he told the tides to stop, and it didn't. Proving that you're not a god among men. You're no one. There are other rulers throughout history, if you see in the 3rd and 2nd century leading up to the time of Christ, who would actually deny the claims of their subject. Their subjects would say, you are a god among men, you should be worshiped as such. And they would say, no, we are not, because we have no power over the sea. And yet, so all of this, Psalm 107, Psalm 89, the story of Jonah, the story of the seas, the Red Sea parting in Exodus, all of this is playing through the minds of the disciples when they see Messiah step up to the bow of the boat and look out upon the storm and say, with a whisper, be still. Miraculously calms. This is what we see of Jesus in Mark chapter 4, showing his might. When I was in high school, basketball was my life. Basketball and girls. But I was really terrible at the second, and so I was halfway decent at the first, so I spent most of my time with basketballs because the girls didn't really want to have anything to do with me. And so one of the things I did is we would travel. My dad was a traveling preacher, most of you guys know that. And so we would travel around the country, so I was just like, I watched the movie Pistol, Pete Maravich, and I was like, I want to be like Pete Maravich, I want to shoot like him, I want to handle like him. And so I would carry a basketball everywhere I went. I would sleep with it, as uncomfortable as it was. I would do the fingertip drills in the middle of the night. And one of the things I learned to do was spin the ball on my finger. I had read that Pete Maravich spun the ball on his finger for 50 minutes. In the movie, it's an hour, but that's not true. For 50 minutes, and after 50 minutes of spinning the ball on his finger, two and a half of his knuckles had worn down, blood all over his hands, until he stopped. And so for me, I was like, I want to be like Pete Maravich. So I learned to spin the ball on my finger. I thought about bringing it this morning, but it's been years, okay? And so I can spin the ball on my finger for a minute, 2 minutes, and the longest I ever did was 15 minutes and 42 seconds. It's a long time, right? And you're like, man, you were so braggadocious. Look, this is the best I can come up with for my achievements in life. So just give me this, okay? Just let me have this, all right? 15 minutes, 40 seconds is a 17-year-old spinning the ball on my finger, okay? That's where we were. This morning, obviously there's a baseball game going on across the way. And so the community center has given us permission that we can kind of block off this parking lot for you guys. And so Richard, our head deacon, our advisory team member, he's out there. Every time there's a baseball game, he's out there. Him or Evan, and they're standing at the street, and they're basically driving people away from church. Okay? You can't come here. And this morning, everybody was respectful. Everybody's like, oh, that's fine. Like, we'll go back. We didn't realize we'll park across the street, except for one car, one driver, obnoxious as they were, told Richard off, walked across the street. So Richard walked over, picked up the car, spun it on his finger, and flicked it across Main Street. And like right away, like, you know, you tell these type of stories and you're like, that's Obviously, you joke, you chuckle, you roll your eyes, because it can't happen. Richard's strong and robust and handsome. Yeah, why are you laughing at that, okay? No, but Richard is my boy. I love Richard, okay? I love Richard. But he can't flick a car across Main Street. All of us together can't do that because our power is limited. It's a reality that we live with every day of our lives. We like to believe that we are in control. There's a really famous and obnoxious book that just came out called Let Them. And the whole premise of the book, I read it. My wife was like, please read this book. And I read it and I hated it. And the whole premise is let people do what they want to do. And you can only control your life. Guess what? You can't control your life. You don't have the power to control your life. Just look at our lives and you can tell the messes that exist around us that we wish we could clean up. The diagnosis that we wish we could snap our fingers and it would be gone. The relationships that we wish we had or could mend and we cannot. We're powerless in the face of, we're hopeless and we are engulfed by storms around us. And where do we run? Well, we run to amusement oftentimes. We run to non-satisfactory means oftentimes. Nothing wrong with those things in and of themselves in their proper place. But there's only one. We have to be reminded, most of us know this, we have to be reminded there's only one who can miraculously calm the storm within, can settle the sea. All of our power, if we're honest, if we're truly honest, all of our power, all of our talents are like spinning a basketball on your finger for 15 minutes. What's the point? Or pretending that we can flicker. I see this all the time, especially with guys, with dudes, even here. We try to puff out our chests, so to speak. And we try to speak in terms that make us look more powerful than we could ever actually be. And there's only one. There's only one. There's only one Messiah. There's only one who can speak, and nature stills itself. So he miraculously calms, and he legitimately cares. We see both of these here in this story. Legitimate power to obey, to command nature. But then we see this. The final thing is that Jesus eternally cures. Okay? And you start to see that here in this story about what he says. So peace be still. There's a great calm that descends. He got up, rebuked the wind, verse 39, said to the sea, silence, be still. Then he said to them, verse 40, why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? And I think it's easy, at least for me, religiously and self-righteous and proud as I am, to look at them and be like, yeah, what's wrong with you guys? You got Jesus in the boat. You got the Messiah, the Creator, the King, who was right there in the ship with you in the storm. Why are you freaking out? Why are you afraid? Why are you overwhelmed? Trust in God. It's also easy, if I'm just going to be honest with you guys, at least for me, maybe for you, to be unsympathetic oftentimes to the plights of humanity. After all, we bring it up on ourselves a lot of times. And sometimes we don't. And perhaps there's more sympathy for that which is not brought upon ourselves than the destruction that we do bring upon ourselves. But either way, it's, hey, you know what? Just think logically about this. Just get it together. Here's the solution. Here's the means out of this. Here's what you need to do. You have this decision or you have this decision. That's how you should operate. But when it comes upon my shoulders, when that anxiety and fear descends upon my heart, I don't have Jesus in the boat. We understand this biblically. It sounds trite because we've learned it as children, but we have Christ in the soul. He is here with us presently, and he legitimately cares. And he alone can bring peace. He miraculously, nonsensically, beyond understanding brings peace because he alone eternally cures the situation. Don't you have faith? Don't you believe? That's what Jesus is saying. Don't you believe? And look, this is not to beat anybody up here who struggles, because we all do. We struggle to believe. That's part of our humanity. It's part of our fallenness. But he's just reassuring us this morning, I am with you. That's the assurance he gave to his disciples. when he says, hey, go and make disciples and be my witnesses and be filled with the Holy Spirit and his power, and I will be with you forever, even to the end of the age. I'm on a journey with you. I'm going to be with you in these storms. I go back this morning to the book, Rembrandt is in the Wind, and I've mentioned it in years past. I've read it 3 or 4 times now. And in chapter 2 of the book, he tells the story of the namesake, and I won't ruin it for you, and we don't have time. It's not really relevant to the teaching this morning, but why the book is called Rembrandt is in the Wind. Rembrandt in the 17th century only did one seascape. It was called Jesus on the Sea of Galilee. And this is a painting of that, and I know it's washed out once again because of the lighting in here. You can look it up for yourself later on today. It's very fascinating because not only is it the only seascape that Rembrandt did, and it's incredibly detailed, but if you look closely down in the center right of the picture, one of the disciples in this boat is looking out directly at us. You got some who are maintaining the rigging, trying to keep it from drowning. You got others who are talking to the Lord who's there in the boats. But one disciple calmly is looking straight out at us. And it's interesting because all historians have noted, all art experts have noted, that disciple who's looking out at us is none other than Rembrandt himself. It's the only piece of art that he painted himself into. Why did he do this? And Russ Ramsey in the book makes this declaration. This is his estimation of why Rembrandt painted himself in the seascape on the Sea of Galilee. He says, by painting himself into the boat in the storm on the Sea of Galilee, Rembrandt wants us to know that he believes his life will either be lost in a sea of chaos or preserved by the Son of God. Those are his only 2 options. And by peering through the storm and out of the frame to us, he asked if we are not in the same boat. Will we be lost to this chaos? Or will we be found in the Son of God, who eternally secures the soul? A couple of last things I'll say about this I find very fascinating. The disciples, verse 41, what happened when the storm hits? They're afraid. What happens when Creator Messiah steps up into the boat and says, be still? They're terrified. It's a different fear that takes root. And they were terrified. And they asked one another, who then is this? Even the wind and the sea obey him. Can we not just admit that when the disciples departed the shores of Galilee, eastern shore headed for the western shore, just 8 miles across, that most likely they were taking the presence of Jesus for granted in the boat, because all was calm and all was as it should be. But when the storm hits, no longer were they taking presence of God himself in flesh for granted. It was the one that they ran to. And it's the same. Spurgeon says, and I've used this quote before, but he says this, I have learned, and it's really tough to learn this, but he says, I have learned to kiss the wave that throws me against the rock of ages. It's like when things are calm in our life and everything is as it should be, my contention is most often we take our standing, we take our relationship, we take redemption itself, we take salvation for granted. And when the storms hits, when he in his sovereign care leads us into the storm, is when he knows we will run to him for refuge, for protection, for strength, for deliverance. And then he delights to deliver. And it reminds us again, if there were no storms, if there was no transgression, there would be no deliverance. There would be no safety. There would be no salvation. We wouldn't understand these concepts of the depth of God's love for us. And so I love that here with the disciples in the boats. They take it for granted. They're oblivious to what is about to happen, but when the storm comes, they run to him. They say, you don't care about us. Jesus shows them that he cares legitimately and infinitely, rebuking nature itself, calming the storm, and granting to us eternal security, eternal liberation. And that's what this story points us to. It does not mean that every storm that happens to us in our lives, everything you're going through right now, you will be delivered from. It's not what he's talking about, temporally speaking. In the here and now, we might carry aches and pains and betrayals with us the rest of our lives. But what it does mean for us is that he'll be with us in the storm. And what it does mean for us is that ultimately he will deliver us from all storms. Because unlike Jonah, who said, hey, you know what? Cast me, the prophet, the representative of God who has sinned, cast me into the storm and everything will be still. Jesus himself said before the Father, according to the Father's will, cast me, the sinless one, into the storm. For these, so I can take on their storm and grant them my peace. And that's the assurance we have. Let's pray.